Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for stopping by today. It's Tuesday, it's the 16th of February. I'm walking down Rotary Street and this video is going to be another Bygone Days memories video. People have said that they enjoy those and I haven't done one for a while. So let's go. Today's video is going to be about telephones and mobile phones. Now, I don't consider myself to be old. I'm not a youngster for sure, but I definitely wouldn't describe myself as an old person. And for those of you that ask how old I am, I'm gonna give you the usual answer. I'm too young to be a boomer, but I'm too old to be a millennial. So I'm somewhere in between. So on that note, mobile phones. Now when I was a kid, mobile phones just didn't exist. In fact, most people didn't even have a house phone. Maybe I just hung around in poorer circles. I definitely came from a very poor family and most of my friends, well, they weren't well off anyway. And the school I went to didn't have a lot of well off people, but most of the people I knew just didn't have home phones. And we first got a home phone when I was around 15, 16. I was in my last year at high school and it was really exciting. It was one of the rotary dial phones because that was the way phones were back then, and it was in our lobby of our house and it was placed on the wall. It was a wall phone. We could have had a table phone, but my dad chose a wall phone and we weren't allowed to use it. I mean, we were if we had an important call to make, but we'd have to go to my dad or my mum and say, oh, I need to make this call, I want to phone so and so about such and such a thing, and my mum and dad would think about whether that was a valid reason to use the phone, and then they would just say no. You couldn't phone up just to talk to your friends or anything, because my mum would always say the same thing, you'll see them at school. There's nothing that can't wait till you see them at school. And talking of school, we had a phone at school. We didn't have a phone at primary school for the pupils to use, but at secondary school we had a phone for the pupils to use. It was under the staircase, which was called staircase 1, because our school had 3 staircases called 1, 2 and 3. The phone was under staircase 1, and if you needed to use the phone because it had a lock on it, you would have to go to the office, ask to speak to somebody and put a request in as to why you needed to use the phone. And again, it was a sort of the same scenario as being at home. The school office staff would decide whether your request constituted an emergency, and then they would just say no. For instance, you couldn't use the phone if you forgot your PE kit or your cookery ingredients, so you couldn't phone up and say, hey mum, dad, I forgot my PE kit, can you drive to school and I'll pick it up at break, whatever. No, that didn't constitute an emergency. It would have to be something really big. So more often than not, you just weren't allowed to use the phone. It definitely wasn't around for social purposes. And in those days, phones really weren't used for social purposes. From what I'd gather, at least from my experience, they would just be used really for emergencies, or if you had to say phone somebody up like a electric company or a gas company or any kind of utility company. We had a phone box on the corner of my street, and this was before we got our house phone. We had a phone box on the corner of my street, and if you wanted to make a phone call you would go to the phone box, take your 2p in hand, because at the time one telephone call cost one shiny coppery 2p piece, and I think you got about 2 or 3 minutes for your 2p. So you'll go to the phone box, look up the number in the phone directory, because there'd be a big fat paper phone directory in the phone box. You would look up the number and call them, but most of the time there'd be a queue outside the phone box. There'd be 2 or 3 people waiting outside and somebody inside already in a call, so you would just have to get in the queue and wait to make your call. Because I remember there was this one time when I needed to call an ambulance because my dad had a medical emergency. I was only young at the time, maybe around 13 or 14, I don't remember. And my mum was panicking and screaming and trying to help my dad, and she screamed at me to run over the road and call an ambulance. So I ran across the road, and there was a lady in the phone box and there was a guy waiting outside, and I was just crying, and he was like, "You're all right?" I said, "I need to phone an ambulance, and my dad needs an ambulance." So the guy opened the phone box door and said to the woman, "You've got to come out of there, you've got to let her use the phone, she needs an ambulance." And the lady just came straight out of the phone box and let me call 999 to call an ambulance, because 999 calls are always free. You didn't need your 2p to call an ambulance. So yeah, that was like my experience of phones when I was a kid, and I never really ever used the phone for social purposes till I got to my late teens and I moved out of my home and into my own place, and I was earning quite a bit more money than what I was used to, and we had a phone in the house where I was renting in London, West Finchley actually, and then we could use the phone there for social purposes and just chatting with friends and stuff. And it always struck me as odd to use the phone to talk to someone. It just seemed like a really weird thing to do. Like, why would you use your phone to talk to somebody when you could go down and see them or write them a letter? And it felt really weird. And eventually, fast forward a few years later, when mobile phones first came out, I got a mobile phone, and it was a big clunky brick, but at the time I felt I was really cooking with gas because it felt awesome. And I had it with Vodafone, but here's the thing, you had to buy 2 kinds of credit to use it. It was pay as you go. Like 90% of the phones back then were pay as you go. But here's the thing, you couldn't just go to the Vodafone shop with your phone and with a £10 note and say, put £10 credit on this phone and have £10 worth of phone calls. Because that's noisy. It didn't work out like that. If you went to the Vodafone shop with your £10 note, you didn't get £10 worth of phone calls. You got £5 worth of calling credit and £5 worth of service credit. So yeah, you heard that right. £5 got you 30 days of service credit. So whether or not you use your phone, if you didn't put that £5 of credit on every month for service credit, they would cut your service off and you couldn't make phone calls. So in other words, if you had £4 of calling credit on your phone and you didn't top a £5 up by the end of the month on your service credit, you would just lose your phone number, because they just would terminate your contract basically. And then more mobile companies started, and I can't remember which ones were which, but a couple started up where you didn't need service credit. So obviously people, they immediately switched to the companies where you didn't need to use the service credit. So in the end, Vodafone knocked that on the head and just said, oh, fair enough, all your money now goes on to calling credit. And then more and more people started off getting contracts and stuff. But back then there were no touch screens, and I remember when the Nokia came out, the one people like to call the brick. Was it the 6110? I can't remember the actual name of it, but I still have my old Nokia somewhere. And the game to play on that was Snake. You would see everybody playing Snake on their old Nokia phone, and it was a big thing to be able to play games on your phone. But another big thing on those phones, like the Nokia phones, was the logos and the ringtone. And in the papers, like the Sun and the Mirror and the Star and all that, they would have pages of adverts of logos and ringtones, and you would phone up the number, or text the number, I should say, text the number for that particular logo and ringtone. It would cost you around £5 because they weren't cheap, and then they would send it to your phone, and you'd get like this little pixelated 8-bit logo for your phone and a ringtone to go with whatever themed logo you had. Like you could have a wrestling logo and theme tune. No, I had a Buffy the Vampire Slayer logo and ring tune. And everybody used to be like showing off their logos and ringtones. Then eventually it got to the point where people could download their own tunes via the internet. So basically logo and ringtone businesses just all went bust, or just stopped, or petered out, whatever turn of phrase you wanted to use. And eventually we got to touch screens, which were really cool. My first touchscreen phone was a Samsung Galaxy, and I've still got it at home somewhere. And the Samsung Galaxy is the phone that I recorded my very first YouTube video on. The one wading being cut off by the tide. My oldest video, the first one I ever recorded, was recorded off an old Samsung Galaxy. Well, I'm going to end this video now because I have gone on a little bit longer than I intended to do. So I hope you enjoyed it, and please hit that like button and maybe even subscribe for more videos. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Goodbye.